I know you're gonna dig this.
This is Rhine McLin and Marsha Bonhart, co-hosts of the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center's Funk Chronicles Talk Back. Recorded live here at DATV Studios in Dayton, Ohio.
And you know, it's always so exciting, Ryan, because there are always such great guests that are connected to funk and Dayton's history. In fact, today we have with us Randy Villars, welcome, and we have Mr. Keith Cheatham and Mr. Mark Anthony Newberry. Gentlemen, welcome, and thanks so much for being our guest today. You know, because I can't say this afternoon or this evening because we never know when this is going to play so much. We want to make sure we're covered. So thanks very much for being with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, let's start off with why do you believe that the Funk Museum is important, and what do you see your contribution? I'll start off with Randy V.
Thank you, Ryan. Well, I was with Bootsy Collins for about 4 years or so, 2011 to 2015, and that was really the first time I had been heavily immersed in funk music, although I had listened to a lot of funk music. But what I found out was that funk music is kind of not received all it's just due in the music industry. It's kind of been off to the side a little bit. So I think that's why the Funk Museum, the Exhibition Center, Hall of Fame, I think that's why it's important, is to get the message out about funk music, how much great funk music there really is, and how much this area has been responsible for a lot of that, all the great funk bands that have come out of Dayton and Cincinnati. So I think that's why it's important.
Well, you know, Mark, it's going to be pretty challenging right now, as much as we appreciate it, because we are here in Dayton, so we understand how we understand its impact. But now, funk is not what's happening. I mean, now you have rap, you have hip hop, and so where has funk gone, and how can you bring it back?
I think Keith should answer that because he's got a plan to bring funk back.
There we go.
Yeah.
We're trying to bring it back. And like Bootsy always says, keep funk alive. And what better way to do it than to have a museum or an exhibition like that. You know, things have changed quite a bit. You know, over the decades, music isn't the way it was back when we were coming up. You're talking more realistic type of music back then.
You don't have to be a musician anymore. You know, you don't have to be a real musician. You can just play with the little dials and
yeah,
make the
you've
sound.
got the computers and that type of thing now. But and I mean, that's the direction music has gone these days. And unfortunately, I mean, what can you do about it? There are some young people out there today, musicians that are playing funk music, trying to bring that back, but
Tell her what you're doing with Sun.
well, yeah, we're in the process of trying to bring Sun back. You know, Sun was happening back in the 70s out of Dayton, Ohio, right around the time with the Ohio Players and Heat Wave and all of these groups were out here playing. So I'm in the process of trying to get Sun back out here again.
With a slightly different change to the name.
Yeah, well, this group is going to be called Sun Millennium, basically having to do with the turn of the century. So same Sun songs, different personnel, but I just felt it's time to bring this back. A lot of people have been asking me about that, you know, when is the band coming back? You know, we miss that, those old grooves and that sound and, you know, that feel. So that's what I'm trying to do, you know, get that back out there as quickly as possible.
But I also see that in some of your movies now and some of your commercials that they are intertwining some funk music into whatever this new music is. And even some of the rappers and some of the other folks are having that funk beat in their music. And I think we're starting to see a resurgence of kids being interested in instruments.
Yeah.
And I think the lull came in the instrument interest was because the schools weren't able to give the kids the exposure to the music in the olden days where everybody had to learn how to play some type of instrument.
That's true. It's ironic that you mentioned about the commercial situation. Last night around 11 o'clock hour, I saw 2 national commercials that had the funk music and incorporated in its commercial. Funk has never been away. It's been around since the 60s, and it's just been labeled different names throughout the years in my radio career. R&B, soul, CHR/rhythmic. It's been labeled different names, even disco to a certain degree, if you want to incorporate funk into that, because disco came from funk.
But when we talk about the true funk, I mean, R&B is one thing, you know, you're talking about Gladys Knight or Luther Vandross, but the funk has just its own distinct kind of edge.
Right.
What is that edge that it has, that it carries, beyond R&B, beyond disco, beyond the other genres?
Funk has its own feel, you know, and that's
Is it
really,
from the guitar? Is it from the sax? Is
well,
it from the, what's it from?
It's really a combination of things, you know, the beat, which is really important, the bass, the guitar, the whole thing. If you go back to the 60s, when James Brown came out, you know, I mean, he started all this stuff. And it was just simple, you know, a simple drum beat, a simple bass line, and a guitar line. You know, you never ever heard keyboards in James Brown's music. And, but I know the first time I saw James Brown on television, it just blew me away, you know, just watching what he does. And being as young as I was at the time, you know, you try to take as much as you can and absorb it. You know, I always knew I wanted to be a musician, a guitarist. And, but you really, at the time, when you're that young, you really don't know what to do or which direction to go, or, you know, so you kind of get advice as you go along the way. But you start out with James Brown, and along comes Parliament Funkadelic and Sly and the Family Stone and Bootsy, and it just went on from there. And but then disco came along, you know, and at that time, it really didn't phase out the funk. Like you said, funk is still here. It's always been here.
It's here. It's definitely here.
And like Bootsy right now, he's in the studio working on his next album. And I know he's trying his best to, you know, bring it back. And a lot of the touring that Randy and I did with Bootsy, it amazed me to see all the young people in the audience. I'm expecting to see these older people, you know, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and but you look out there and these kids.
That's because their parents are playing the music at home.
Exactly.
That's what's going on. You know, when you have the millennial kids liking Earth, Wind and Fire and liking, you know, James Brown, what have you, it's because mom and dad, who are in their 50s and 60s, are blasting it in the living rooms at home. Thankfully.
Exactly.
The flame never went out. Throughout the years, funk music has always been in movies, constantly in movies. So therefore, you have to say, for instance, Funktown just received a Grammy Award, which of course was incorporated in funk music. It's 2016, it's still around. Before even going further, I'd like to congratulate the Funk Music Hall of Fame for its recent Philo Award. That tells you right there, if you receive an award from the state about the funk music, it's still here. You know, there's people that are still recognizing funk music. It's just because of this name, the label. And that goes back to my radio situation, where radio had put labels in order to blockade your music from being played on certain radio because of the commercial money, in other words, okay? But now with the advent of internet, you yourself can create a radio station in your own bedroom and broadcast any type of format that you have. So we're in the midst of involvement, evolution of music. This is why we're speaking today about funk and why it should have its own Hall of Fame here.
Marsha, you mentioned, or you were asking the characteristics of funk. One thing I learned, especially during those years with Bootsy, is, and this goes back to James Brown too, is this concept of on the one, you know, because before James Brown, it was on the two, you know, the backbeat, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. But with funk, it was, and I can picture Bootsy doing this with his bass. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. It was about the one, you know. So that's one of the big musical aspects of funk. It's all about that beat coming down on the one, that accent on the one.
Well, you mentioned that James Brown accented the second beat.
No, James Brown really created the one.
He created the one. So who was doing the two?
Well, everybody. Before that. Everybody before that. It was
and Bootsy was a protege of James Brown, right?
Absolutely. Played in James Brown's band when he and Catfish, his brother, were in there when they were still teenagers.
Yeah, teenagers.
Yeah. So he got that. He got that indoctrination into it.
Can you do that again, Randy?
Yeah, well, I don't do it like Bootsy, but you know, he's got the bass and it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. He'd swing around. I'm going to hit Keith like this.
What's funny about it, you know, Randy and I can kind of joke about it, because when Bootsy put the Funk Unity Band together back in 2011, and he would just drill that into you, you know. And so when the drummer's playing, 1, there's Bootsy.
Yeah.
1. Yeah. That's all he wanted, just 1. If you're not giving him that 1.
That's right.
And so it's got to be a hard, you got to have to go hard on that one, right?
Accent,
I mean, whether it's the drum, whether it's, if it's the horn, whatever it is, it's got to be
everything is on the one.
Everybody's supposed to feel that. And a lot of people don't realize Bootsy plays great drums. He played drums on some of his early hits.
And
so
guitar.
he would hop on the drum kit in rehearsals, and he would show us how it's supposed to go. And I have to say, the real drummers had to like pay attention. It's like, oh, I see, this is how you do it, you know. So
excellent.
Yeah.
You know, and with that said, you know, it's stemming from funk itself with On the One. It spread worldwide. Cuban music, so much rock, it's so much type of areas of funk music that's been played today, different areas, and it came from, like what you mentioned here.
You know, one of the things that you said, Mark, was kind of interesting when you said that they classified the music for the radios.
Correct.
So that certain music would be played at different places.
Right.
So that means like we had jazz, you had blues, you had country and western, you had rock and roll. But don't you think that rock and roll music, with the funk music, was the form of the African American or more progressive musicians' answer to rock and roll with the development of the funk music? And I saw that, I mean, as I've been doing more and more research on this, is that when you thought of rock and roll, you thought of you really never thought of African Americans really with rock and roll. You know, they thought of Elvis Presley, Bill Haley and the Comets, the Buddy Hollies. You thought of them as rock and roll.
Right.
And then the music, when it came to the funk, like the James Browns and then that group that came along, there was a different sound immediately that you could tell. And in between with the singers, it was the doo-wop. So and I always saw the doo-wop as the bridge from the rock and roll to the funk.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's where George Clinton started out.
Well, really, if you go back to the 50s,
Okay.
you had Chuck Berry.
Right.
Okay, you had Little Richard. That was rock and roll. It really was.
But they really didn't call it rock and roll.
Yeah, it
For them.
But the rock and rollers admitted that they got their techniques from Chuck Berry
Exactly.
and Little
Right.
Richard.
It's just like Jimi
when you
Hendrix.
could get them to
know,
admit
Jimi
it.
Hendrix had a certain style, a way of playing his guitar. Nobody was playing like Hendrix, back then, and people just tend to copy, people who start these things, and so like I said, that's where I got it from. I started playing guitar at 9 years old, and I really didn't know what type of music I wanted to play. I liked all types of music, but I wound up playing funk I'm still not sure why. I just liked the way it sounded and the way it felt. And I'm still playing the same thing. I mean, I play other types of music. Like Randy is a jazz musician, but yet he's also a funk musician.
Right.
Randy can play country western. Randy can play pop. You know, I've known Randy for a long time. And
You got that check I sent you, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. He just mentioned all these different genres of music. You mentioned country, rock, and so forth that you like and that he likes and that you also play. And that validates the point of what I was trying to mention regarding the labeling of music and how funk became what it is. Music has no color at all. If you
Should not anyway.
True,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. But yet, this stems back to where I was mentioning about the labeling. It was labeling being placed at the radio stations and onto the music and putting tags, like you mentioned Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was rock, really. That's what he really is.
Yeah.
But yet, because of what you see visually, you would not associate that back then. But of course, today, we're all a melting pot now, so we can look past that. But yet, the fact that that is rock for a fact. Music has no color whatsoever. It's what you feel, like you were stating, what you feel. You kept mentioning on the one, is how you feel, that soul, and that spirit, and that groove. That's what you're trying to connect with who is listening, and whatever the case may be, what you're creating that atmosphere. Back to radio, how radio came involved, because radio knew one day it was going to fall. I was taught that back then when I was in radio. Started out a small station in Dayton and accumulated to other stations throughout Dayton, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland before I left out to go to LA in Hollywood. Behind the doors, we were told not to play certain music, like the funk music, because if you're driving down 75 or wherever it may be, and you come into a city and you're flipping through your dials for a certain station, if you didn't hear Parliament, if you heard Parliament for a station, for instance, you knew that was the station that you were going to listen to, because it had the flag station of the kind of music that was being played. But yet sometimes you would hear Flashlight, but yet also hear rock on that same station. I was one that was constantly doing that because I worked throughout the industry in different formats, but I kept pushing Slave, Ohio Players, and yet people still wanted to hear that. Even when I went to the clubs for those rock stations and other formatted stations I was working at, people want to still hear the funk music, and they still do it today. Like I stated before, I saw 2 national commercials last night, and they were playing the funk music. You hear it right now. You can go through all your cable channels of movie channels and so forth, and you will hear funk music throughout the history of movies.
Yeah, I think the amazing thing about funk is that it's a worldwide phenomenon. You know, we played in Japan. People are crazy about funk music over there. We went in a club in Osaka, was it? That's dedicated to George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and the club's called Zip, and they have a chalkboard in there with everybody's signatures on it in chalk. Fred Wesley, George, Mudbone, all these guys, and these signatures are like 25, 30 years old. They preserved them on this chalkboard, and they've got all these LPs, like a whole collection, a whole shelf full of LPs. And we walked into that club after our concert, and they had on their television in there, and it's a tiny little place, they had video footage of the concert we had just played running. You know, so Japan, they're crazy about it. Europe, we played in Brazil to sold out audiences, so enthusiastic. And I hate to say it, but American audiences have got to catch up with Japanese audiences and European audiences and the audiences in South America, because the enthusiasm is like 10 times as overt, and just they just love it. They're having so much fun, and they show you that they are.
That's the way it happens, though. When it's right here, it's like any relationship that you've had for a long time.
Yeah.
You take it for granted.
Yes.
Right.
You know, and we know it's here. We know it belongs to us, and so it's like, yeah, we got funk. Yeah, we know.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas other countries appreciate it because it didn't come from there.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
I think
and
that's
so
true. Yeah.
they long for it. Whereas we just know we can get it any time. We punch up some
Right.
radio station somewhere,
Right.
and there it is.
I think
so
so.
it's like being married for a long time.
In fact, a new
Right.
station
I
just
think
came
so.
aboard in our area where you can hear some funk music. But yet, we had mentioned before about the internet is a good platform to broadcast the funk, if that's what you're wanting to hear directly. But yet, it goes back to what I mentioned again, is money. back in the days, it was only 3 networks for TV. Radio stations were the mom and pop stations, but yet, of course, behind the doors, I'll play your music for a couple little duckies underneath the table, so forth.
payola.
Yes, and that was going on, and then it kept evolving until the big stations, or rather big radio corporations, were buying all the mom and pop radio stations, so therefore you heard the exact same thing across the air from one city to another. That's a monopoly on the music, on what you're going to listen to, because I'm the radio station, I'm the corporation. I own all these stations in Atlanta, Chicago, and so forth and so on. And this is what I'm going to dictate to what you're going to hear, and this is the kind of format. That's why it's a big evolution. That's why I'm so glad we're in 2016, the future where you can broadcast your own type of music, your own radio station.
Yeah, that's very true. I've released 3 CDs as a solo artist, smooth jazz CDs. And what I learned from my producer, Ken Navarro, who's out of Baltimore, he said, this is back in the mid-90s, he said, you got into this business a little too late, because he said it's getting harder and harder to get your stuff played. He called it the 4 walls of smooth jazz. He said you have to write within the 4 walls, this box. You have to be in this box, and if you're not, they won't play your stuff. And on top of that, what they were starting to do in the 90s, which has continued with the smooth jazz thing, is they were throwing in Gino Vanelli and Anita Baker, and so you didn't just have the Kenny G's and the Dave Causes and people like that. Now they're throwing vocal music in there too, so that made it tougher and tougher for new instrumental artists to get into that game, you know. And I think it's true with all of radio. It's so formatted, it's so in a box, you know, and that makes it tough for artists. But as Mark said, it's starting to open up now with the internet, and you can have your own YouTube channel, you can have your own website, sell your music online. So that's one of the good things about the internet.
And what you're seeing also with the internet, even with the vocal stars, they're not going through the traditional process of having their music played on the radio, and they're just dropping it themselves on the internet. So, I mean, there are some groups out there that I've never heard of, but my students have told me that I call it the underground music, and they can have a concert. They can do a concert and be sold out. And nobody has never surfed for, you and I would know about it, Marsha.
Exactly.
And so a lot of this is happening. So when you talk about that, and I want to go back to what you say when you talk about music. One thing about music, it does cross all racial, ethnicity, age groups. You know, it's something about music. You can go, and I always like to go to, I see an audience, you know, you have music. And you go and you look at the audience. And the audience is all whole for that moment in time, that those musicians are holding that audience in whole. No matter what I think of you or not think of you, that for that one moment in time, everybody is focused on the music. Now how they end up afterwards, that's another thing.
Well, but you know, and it's a universal language, which is why when they talk about the foreign countries that are foreign to us anyway, and everybody's grooving and everything, and they may not even understand a word that's being said, but the language of music is just universal. Everybody feels the beat. Everybody can hear that. You know, it doesn't matter
and the
what
movement,
right.
And I really have a question to ask. That, you know, you've been in, and this is for Randy, and this is for Keith. You've been in the business, and you've been playing music for years. What is it that when each time you do a show, and especially like when you were like with Bootsy Collins, let's say that, you know, you're going to play those. You got to play the regular music because that's what you got to play his hits because that's what the people come out for. And you got to play them like it's the very first time you played them. What inspires you to do concerts and give it like it's your very first concert, that excitement that you have, or do you just become professional and it's a job? I mean, I want to know that.
Well, for me, I mean, one, you have to love it. It's not for everybody. I didn't think I'd be doing it as long as I've been doing it.
What, for 2 years? Because you look so young.
Oh, well, you should be there when I wake up in the morning sometimes. Yeah, you have to love the business first of all. And there's just so much that goes into it. And, you know, I mean, from rehearsals to the traveling, for me, it's got, because I've been around the world so many times, it's nothing new to me anymore. You know, Randy's been out there, you know, he's been with Bootsy quite a while. And so we've had a chance to travel and experience different things that a lot of people don't. But every audience really is different, you know, it seems to me.
How about the reaction from the audience, the crowd? Does that inspire you? Because, you know, Ryan she's right. City after city after city, and you have to be up. You guys get in at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then you're back up and you're traveling. That's a drain on your body, it's a drain on your mind, and it can, you know, and if you're not focused, your instrument is not going to sound the same at every concert. You just can't.
For sure, yeah.
So what gets you psyched up when you see it? 10,000 people out there screaming and calling, you know, and saying that, yeah, baby, with Bootsy, you know.
I mean, when we toured with Bootsy, I mean, it's exciting just to watch Bootsy.
Oh yeah.
Because, and I've asked Bootsy several times, I said, man, how do you do it? You know, I mean, he stays in shape. You know, his wife makes sure that he eats well. When we're in the hotels, you hardly ever see Bootsy. Bootsy stays in his room and he's focused, you know, because he knows he has to go out on that stage later on that evening. Yeah, and you have to be. It is. It's really all about discipline. And but at the same time, like I said, you have to love it. You know, I've come up with a lot of guys who started when I did, and a lot of them give up, especially when the electronics came into play, like the MIDI keyboards and the computers and that type of thing. And it put a lot of guys out of business.
A lot of them, I think, from what I've heard about older musicians, they just feel that it took their musicianship away from them. You know, that they study music, and many of them studied classically, you know, and just when you get a machine that's giving you all the sound, they think, oh, what's left for me? You know, you know, my parents paid for whatever lessons, or I went to school and learned how to do this and know how to do that, and now all I have to do is do that.
Well, we had a bass player in the group, because Bootsy plays bass, of course, and then there were 2 other bass players in 2011 who were playing traditional bass parts, because sometimes Bootsy solos, like a guitar player would solo. So you still got to have a bass player playing those other parts. And this guy's name was T.M. Stevens. He's pretty famous in his own right, plays a lot in Europe and Japan and even India and China. He lives in New Jersey. And Bootsy would turn the stage over to him at a certain point in the show, and he would do a Jimi Hendrix tune or 2 and some things like that. But anyway, TM's a very dramatic guy, and he would talk to the audience, and you got to picture him, dreads. He's an older guy, he was like 60-something, but he looked like he was about 36, and very, very energetic. And so he would yell at the crowd, and he'd say, hey, listen up. He'd say, put your cell phones away, turn your computers off, and play one of these. And he'd hold up his bass with these luminescent green strings on it. Very dramatic guy. And he says, look up here. He goes, this is real music, no computers, you know, and really.
Bye.